Imagine you're trying to come up with a new campaign and you get together in a room, a few people, and you say, okay, let's kickstart this by asking ChatGPT to give us 10 great ideas for this campaign. Now, some marketers might actually do that and take those 10 ideas and use them as a starting point. But Kyle suggests doing something different. He says, let ChatGPT come up with the 10 best ideas you can come up with, and then table those and never, ever look at them again. Why? Because those 10 ideas are the most obvious best practice things you could come up with, because that's how ChatGPT works. It takes what everyone else is already doing. It doesn't really invent any creative ideas, and it comes up with the 10 most obvious things you could do in that situation. So you know that those are the 10 worst things you could be doing if you're trying to come up with a breakthrough creative campaign. So if you think about that, you could use your brain in the same way and say like, okay, what is everyone doing? What are the best practices? Now let's take those off the table if my goal is to stand out, cut through the noise, cut through the clutter, whatever analogy you wanted to use, and then come up with something completely different.
Hello and welcome to Best Story Wins. I'm your host, Josh, and I'm here with my co-host, Jason. And today our guest is Udi Ledergor from Gong. Udi, thanks for joining us today. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Hey, Udi.
Yeah, so for those that might not know your full background, can you give us a quick overview of what you've done in your career to date and also what you focus on now in your role at Gong?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Tel Aviv, Israel. I moved to San Francisco in the Bay Area 7 years ago, and I've been doing B2B marketing for a little over 20 years now. Just a little scary. I've led marketing teams at 5 companies. I've done some board work, advisory work, some angel investing, and the last fantastic 9 years have been at a company called Gong, which is the leader in revenue AI. And I was fortunate to join Gong 9 years ago as employee number 13 and marketer number 1. And I had the good fortune of building a marketing team that at some point was 60 marketers strong. And then a couple of years ago, I transitioned from that role into my current role as chief evangelist, where I get to focus on things I love doing and do a lot of them, like speaking on podcasts like this and doing industry events and thought leadership on social media and using my, I guess, executive presence and network to help Gong in different aspects of the business.
That's really cool. So you've been a CMO, brand evangelist, advisor. Now you're an author. What's the common thread through all that's guided your approach to marketing?
I think I try to inspire and mentor, and that's a theme in my career. We could trace it back to my childhood when I dabbled in lots of different performing arts, from puppetry to stage lighting to magic shows, and I just loved creating a wow experience for folks. And I guess I found the grown-up job version of that in marketing, where we get to simplify technology for business users that don't need to know how all the nuts and bolts work, but just want to know what the value they'll be getting from it is, what's in it for them. I love putting on event experiences. So all these things have kind of materialized in my day-to-day work. And over the years, I've been fortunate to accumulate a lot of great lessons and experiences that I try to convey to earlier career marketers and founders wherever I can. So I'm a mentor in a whole bunch of startup accelerators and VC funds and PE firms. And I was looking for more ways of scaling that. How can I get in front of even more marketers and founders? And then when I transitioned into my current role a couple of years ago, I finally had a little bit more flexibility on my hands, and I decided to sit down and write my book, Courageous Marketing, where I sum up these 20 years of B2B marketing experience and specifically all the great work that my team had done during my Gong years. And that's been going really, really well. And I get invited to speak about it quite often. But more importantly, people all over the world now have access to these lessons without having to physically be in the same room as I am. So I'm really getting the kick out of seeing the book take off, and people from countries I've never visited buying the book and sending me photos of them reading it in all sorts of wild places. That's really what I was dreaming of.
So I imagine a lot of CMOs would like to eventually one day become a chief evangelist. What I'm curious to understand, like what prompted that shift or that evolution of your role, and how is it different than being in a traditional CMO role?
I think after years of heading marketing for early stage startups and extending that beyond my wildest dreams at Gong, for perspective, I was at Gong from zero to hundreds of millions in revenue. I was leading the marketing efforts. And at that point, we realized the company has continued momentum. We're pretty soon going to be in the billions of revenue. And we wanted to bring in leaders for sales and marketing and customer and people who have seen that scale. So at that point, we decided to bring in these people, and we brought in great people from larger companies like Microsoft and Qualtrics and other companies, leaders who have seen scale much farther than what we've been able to build at Gong. And a lot of us just moved aside to make room for these leaders to lead their teams to the next stage. And we found our own new niches where we can continue to contribute to the business. So I found evangelism. Other friends of mine took on roles like chief innovation officer or chief ecosystem officer. There's so much opportunity when the company is growing at rapid scale like Gong is, that there's no shortage of work to be done. And all of us who have the advantage of context and history of being there for all these years can find many ways to continue contributing to the business.
So what do you think is the unique value of having an evangelist in an organization? And why do you think we're seeing more companies move that way?
I think the advantage of having an evangelist, so I can speak on my behalf, although I am friendly with a good handful of evangelists at other companies. And I would say this is one of the roles where there's a lot of diversity in what people are doing based on their journey and what their company needs of them at the moment. But I can speak about myself. So I have both executive background and presence, which I'll get back to why that's important in a moment, and also very deep knowledge of our industry, our product, our buyers, our competitive set. And so one of the things that I do almost every day is I step into executive meetings. Let's say we're selling to a large enterprise and my team wants to kind of jersey match and bring me and the buyer's CMO, where I can talk about how I've used Gong as CMO and how it could help elevate this large enterprise's marketing team. Now, I don't know anything secret that my AEs don't know. They've heard me do my pitch so many times now, they could probably do it better than I could, but they don't necessarily have the executive experience and presence than I do. So when I come in with this big shot CMO who's been leading marketing teams for 20 years, they're more likely to find me credible because of my experience as a CMO than a 23-year-old AE who might be brilliant and doing their absolute best job, but you can't magically grow the gray hairs at age 23. At least most of us can't. And that's where I provide unique value because I've been with the company so long. I've managed a large marketing team. And when I come speak to this large enterprise CMO, I just come off more credible than a solution engineer or an AE who might deliver the same information, but without that executive presence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super interesting. So you have a strong personal brand. I found you via LinkedIn years ago from your posts, and have been a follower for a while. How do you balance continuing to build your own personal brand with also keeping in mind that you're representing kind of on a meta level the Gong brand? And how do you make sure that you have a good balance there? Or is it more just a matter of like the stronger your brand is, the better that is for Gong, and it's as simple as that?
I think for the most part, it's the latter, which is the stronger my brand is, the more Gong benefits from it. At least that's been my experience so far. And to kind of expand the conversation to not just make it about me, Gong is known for encouraging all of our employees to build their personal brands, to create original content while promoting Gong. But that doesn't mean every post I write or our employees write is promoting Gong. We have a lot of employees that provide updates about their life. Sometimes they have side gigs, whether they're selling sales courses or real estate or whatever they're doing. As long as it doesn't get in the way and doesn't diminish Gong's brand in any way, we typically encourage that. And we know that a lot of what they're doing actually helps Gong. So I'll give an example, sort of how I think about it. I might occasionally write a post about something personal that I did with my kids over summer, and that draws in a lot of new followers. And then a week later, I will write something about Gong's latest product release. Now I have a bigger audience for that post because I built it using some personal posts And now when I actually post about Gong, I have more followers to read it. So that's how I think about building the brand. If everything I did, and this is true for every brand and every person, if everything I did were just promoting our next webinar or our latest press release, nobody wants to follow that. It's obnoxious and it's boring. And so I do try to mix it up. You'll find my posts, sometimes they're about my book. And I think that establishes Gong as a thought leader and authority in the marketing space and in the revenue AI space, just as much as writing about their latest product release. And that just adds a lot more credibility. And sometimes I'll write about my Saturday morning hike up to Twin Peaks this past weekend. And that gets engagement, and that gets the algorithm to favor my post and show it to more people. And then again, when I'll write something about Gong, I just have a bigger audience. And I think I know people want to connect to other people that they feel are human and real. Like nobody wants to be a poster boy for just all your product announcements, but when they see me drenched in a Saturday morning hike and showing up at an event in Tel Aviv to promote my book and then posting something about Gong's product, they know this is a real person. And I think it lends a lot of credibility and authenticity to what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's great perspective. And so you've always been a big believer in the power of brand, and even in, that's maybe sometimes more obvious an area to invest in for consumer products, but you have this belief even in, data heavy, performance obsessed B2B markets. What does brand mean to you now in this modern era?
One of my favorite definitions of brand is what Jeff Bezos famously called it. It's what people say about you when you're not in the room. And that's equally true for companies and people. Think about, it's hard for us to think about ourselves, but think about that one friend you have that the moment they walk out of the room, like you're all giggling about them and saying something because they're known for it. What do people say about you when you leave the room, or about your company when you're not in the room? So when I think about that, it's creating reputation. And in our case, it's also creating trust. And so if you look at the journey of a company in the early days, I think the point of creating a brand is to command attention, because when I'm small and I'm on a shoestring budget, if I have any budget at all, I can't out advertise the big players in my field. I can't cut through the noise by throwing money at the problem. I just don't have enough money to become lazy about creativity and brand. And so that's where, in that vacuum of money, that's where creativity is most important. Another way of saying this is that we're not big enough to be lazy. When you look at some of the big players, I won't mention any names, not going to get into trouble, but think about like really big players. A lot of their marketing is uninspiring because they have enough money to throw at the problem that even if their marketing engine is performing kind of idling at mediocre level, they've already built the trust, they built the brand, everybody knows them, and they just need to maintain it. But when you're a struggling startup, you don't have that luxury. You can't be lazy because you haven't made it yet. And so in that context, at Gong, we decided to create the Gong Labs content series, where it was heavily data-based, still is. And every month or so, we published a new piece showing what works and doesn't work in sales based on actual data. And because this came off as so authentic and it was backed in data, and I always had great salespeople write these stories, so folks like Chris Orlov and Devin Reed and others who have a rich sales experience, these stories became very, very popular with other sales leaders and sales professionals. And so that was the focus in the early days, just to create attention for us and command that attention that we wanted. And I couldn't pay to get enough eyeballs in front of me. I had to actually write content so good that people would want to consume it, would potentially even want to pay for it. So that was the early days. And then once we have a good customer base, Gong has almost 5,000 customers now. Now it's about maintaining that trust and maintaining, or rather keeping, the brand promise. So you know that if you're buying from Gong, you are likely going to get a raving fan experience, because that's one of the things that we stand for. And every one of our 1,600 Gongsters works very hard every day to keep that promise of creating raving fans, whether you're a recruiting coordinator, a tech support engineer, an evangelist, a marketer, or a product manager. We're all trying to live up to that brand promise of creating raving fans. And I'll end with maybe an anecdote of what it looks like when brands don't keep their promise. I'm sure you can all think of a time where you called a utility provider, let's say you're a cable provider or internet provider, and you're livid with all the price hikes and the spotty service, and you're waiting 45 minutes on hold while you're hearing their recording over and over telling you how important your call is to them. And then you go like, are you kidding me? Like, no, my call is not important to you. I wouldn't be waiting here 45 minutes if my call was important to you. That's when there's a incongruity between the brand promise and how well they're keeping it. So we're doing our best, probably not succeeding 100% of the time, but doing our best to keep that promise of creating raving fans every day. And that's the stage that our brand effort are in.
Yeah, that's a great anecdote. It's so funny. I actually had a really bad customer experience this week where I've been working with this telehealth company that has just absolutely beautiful branding, and all their messaging is great, all their promises are great. But as I'm kind of ramping up working with them, the customer experience has been horrible. And I found myself like writing a note to them saying like, your branding is beautiful, but like your brand is awful. And I kind of like, I reeled it back a bit just because I'm like, I don't think they need a lecture on brand. But all that to say that I think you're absolutely right. And I think that, we need to find ways, when we're in that situation, to give people that feedback in a constructive way. But
I think it's great feedback, Josh. I can also, if you want to, I can go down that rabbit hole a little bit and share why I think that happens. So here's why I found that often happens when there's that discrepancy between what a brand says they are and what they stand for and what you actually experience. And the biggest source of that is when the CEO tells the marketing leader, go build us a brand. This is your project. It's a marketing project. Go build us a brand. We want to look pretty and customer centric and strategic and trustworthy. Good luck. Go have fun with that. And the marketer who's trying to do their best and impress, and they might be newer in their career and they don't know better, they'll say, yes, of course, I'll go do that. Now, if marketing agrees to own the brand, that's where the brand goes to hell. That's where everything breaks down. There's no sure way of failing in a brand project by marketing agreeing to own it. And here's why. Because in this imaginary company, maybe your telehealth company, the CEO sent the marketer to go build a really beautiful, polished brand that shows how wonderful they are, and it's also pretty and well designed. But at the same time, he's cutting costs on customer support. Nobody's manning the phone line. Nobody's answering the inbound requests, which might take days. And that's where that discrepancy happens. Now, to solve that, the marketer, when asked to own this branding project, should have said, no, stop right there. You, Mr. or Mrs. CEO, are the owner of the brand. Now, let's sit together as an executive team, decide who we are, what we stand for. And once we all agree on that and realize what that means for all of our teams need to do every day to uphold that promise of who we are and what we do, I will go and be the steward of the brand, and I will create a visual identity, and I'll create a tone of voice for our content, and it'll all be congruent, right? So if we want to be authoritative, I'll make sure that we look that way, but we need to act that way first. If we want to be customer centric or create raving fans, let's first make sure that every single employee is trained on how to do that, has the resources to do that, has the freedom to do that, and is encouraged by ways of awards and recognition and promotions when they do that. And then I can go and make a pretty website and create the visual identity and tone of voice of the brand and showcase and amplify how we're creating raving fans. But if I go and do that separately from what every other employee in the company is doing, that's where you get these crappy brands that you're talking about, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to think of it as like a stool with three legs, right? It's like the people, the product, and the content, or the things that people think of when they think of like the brand experience online. Yeah, and so in my case, I was essentially interfacing with like a one-legged stool because the rest of the infrastructure really wasn't there. But on that note, I love what you said about the CEO needing to be kind of the owner of the brand, or the person that's responsible at the end of the day. One of the things that I think we're all seeing right now in the world of B2B is it seems like we're in a sea of sameness. And I think people relate to that as a brand thing, but also a content thing. Obviously, content is a big part of how you build your brand. But we're even seeing right now, it seems like the theme of the day on LinkedIn is like everyone's positioning all sounds the same. Why do you think that so many brands are sort of losing their nerve, or just like not deciding to be courageous and do something that has the chance of actually being memorable?
Yeah, that's a great topic, and I could address it from many angles. I'll give you two kind of think about. One of them is the famous best practices. So take a marketer, maybe young in her career, and she gets assigned to create a new website or new messaging. And what's the first thing she does? She says, well, I'll look at some of the bigger players in our field, see what they're doing. And I'm going to assume that they're more experienced, maybe even smarter. They've kind of tested what they're doing because they have more resources. And I'm going to get inspiration from what the others are doing. And I'm going to follow the so-called best practices. And here's the problem with that. If you follow those best practices, at best, you're going to get average, mediocre, ordinary results. You're never going to get extraordinary results. And the reason for that is that by definition, by the time anything becomes a best practice, everyone is doing it. So you're not going to be able to stand out by doing what everyone else is doing. And that is the best practice. It's the least risky move. And for many people, it's the natural thing to do because they say, well, I don't want to take this crazy risk or suggest something that nobody's done because that could get me fired. My CEO could be looking at all these other websites and says, oh, but they're doing A. Why are you suggesting B? So I can understand that fear, but it really starts by following best practices, which intuitively seems like a good thing to most of us. But once you realize what it really is, and I'll tie this into an AI real quick. So one of my CMO friends is Kyle Lacey. He's CMO at Toshiba, and he has a really cool AI case that I think demonstrates this point. Imagine you're trying to come up with a new campaign, and you get together in a room, a few people, and you say, okay, let's kickstart this by asking ChatGPT to give us 10 great ideas for this campaign. Now, some marketers might actually do that and take those 10 ideas and use them as a starting point. But Kyle suggests doing something different. He says, let ChatGPT come up with the 10 best ideas you can come up with, and then table those and never, ever look at them again. Why? Because those 10 ideas are the most obvious best practice things you could come up with, because that's how ChatGPT works. It takes what everyone else is already doing. It doesn't really invent any creative ideas, and it comes up with the 10 most obvious things you can do in that situation. So you know that those are the 10 worst things that you could be doing if you're trying to come up with a breakthrough creative campaign. So if you think about that, you could use your brain in the same way and say like, okay, what is everyone doing? What are the best practices? Now let's take those off the table. If my goal is to stand out, cut through the noise, cut through the clutter, whatever analogy you wanted to use, and then come up with something completely different. Which brings me to the second reason why we don't see a lot of this. So as part of the research I was doing for my book, I was reading lots of other books on similar topics and teamwork. And I was really curious what allowed my team members to do their best work during their years on my team. So I started asking over a dozen of them, like, what made you choose these risky options and these experiments and this trial and error? And I heard all these stories from them, and the theme quickly came together. Turns out, and this, I did not label this, I got the label from Adam Grant's book, Think Again. Turns out that what we had created in our team was psychological safety, where our team members felt it was safe to fail. Now, that sounds very trivial, but most teams don't have that state of mind. On most teams, people are very scared of failing because they know that if they do something wrong, they might pay for it with their job, and they don't feel that that sort of behavior is encouraged. On my team, it was the opposite. I pushed people to create crazy ideas and experiment. And worst case, if something didn't go as planned, which it often does, we had a great learning. I commended them for taking the risk, asked them to share what they learned, and we moved on to the next campaign idea. But creating that environment is easier said than done. And teams that manage to create that do produce their best work.
That's I love that perspective. We've used this language for a long time of, is this safe to try? And I'm curious if you were able to, what do you think is necessary in order to be able to foster that? I'm primarily thinking of, your own authority to say that, right? Did you feel like you had great support at the org level to operate? And is that like inherent in the broader culture already?
Yes, I think you're onto a point, Jason, where it has to be kind of multi-layered. So I've talked to CMOs who maybe their personal disposition is they want to go bigger and edgier and riskier, but they come to me for a shoulder to cry on to tell me that they're in an organization that is so conservative that they don't even know how to build this environment in the team, and maybe they can't in that organization if the CEO and every other executive team member and the board are just pushing to go back to best practices and always play it safe. You might not be able to build this risk-taking marketing organization. So it does depend on context. And I think if you put me in a very conservative organization, A, I'd probably be miserable, but B, I probably could not build the risk-taking experimental mind state of a team that I did. So I'm been very lucky at Gong to have a CEO that always pushes us to think bigger and go wilder and gives us a lot of autonomy. And then I did my best to mirror that within my team. And it's probably hundreds of daily interactions. So for example, if a new team member who's not sure like how much autonomy they have over their domain, they'll come to me with a decision. Instead of me telling them what I think they should do, I would ask them, like, what do you think we should do? And then they'll tell me what they think they should do. And I'll say, well, then you know what to do. It's your call. And after they come to me 3 times and they get similar answers, like, what do you think we should do? Go do what you think you should do. They realize by the 4th time, they don't have to come to me with all these decisions. So they develop that larger autonomy around their domain, and they come to me with fewer and fewer things. I used to joke at some point, like, I had a really robust team that had been working with me for years. Like, they didn't come to me with almost anything, and they didn't let me do anything. Like, we put on our big customer event for 500 people. I knew very little about it when I showed up for the event because I trusted them to pull it all together, and they did a fantastic job. And I asked them, how can I help? Like, what can I do? And like, no, you just, go do your other things. We've got this. And I fully trusted them, and they pulled it off time after time. Now I will just qualify that and say that doesn't mean that I'm disengaged from my team or that they can't come to me when they do need help, because I always made sure to stay on top of my craft as much as I can and be a resource for them. So even my veteran team members knew that when they had a genuine dilemma, it could be as trivial as a subject line that they want to try or a campaign idea, they could come to me for a sounding board because I just had more experience by virtue of my years, and I could tell them what my guess is going to work better. But I always left the call to them. I never said, like, you have to do this. So my briefs were always very generic, like, don't make this boring or make this fun. And I knew that they would find a way of doing that. And they knew that if they wanted to share some details and get some more tactical feedback, I was always there for them, but not to micromanage, but actually to encourage their experimentation.
I love that. And, you're starting to touch on this, but when you look at kind of tying back to the brand here, Gong is one of the most admired B2B brands of the last decade, very well recognized. I've always loved the name. Nice throwback to the, hitting the sales gong when you close a deal.
Absolutely.
What are some of the foundational choices that you mentioned in your definition of brand that you feel like really made that work and click with the outside world, to where what they said about you when you weren't in the room really aligned well with some of those foundational choices?
So there were several, but I'll focus on just one that I think best exemplifies what made us different from the early days. So when I started at Gong, within a couple of months, my CEO asked me, hey, why don't we do a proper visual identity? Because when I came in, we had like the ugliest website that someone built in 15 minutes. And I didn't want to invest in it at all in the early days, because I said, first, nobody's coming to our website. Nobody's heard of us. Who cares what our website looks like? Let me focus on catching people where the party is, which is either on LinkedIn or Twitter or at events. Let me go get the people. Once we start building up traffic, then what our website looks like will become more important. But more importantly, I said, I don't know what our story is yet. If to build a good representative visual identity of who we are, we need to really understand who we are, which that means what value do we provide to which customers? How is it differentiated from competition? I didn't know what that story was in my first 6 months of Gong. So I told the CEO, I'm pushing off this project. We're going to have to live with an ugly website for a while until we have some maturity to our story that I can go and design a visual brand about it. Because this is a 6 months project if you're lucky. By the time we build it now, we'll have changed our story 3 times and I'm going to have to scrap that and do it again. I don't want to do that. Like, let's just wait maybe a year until I get more clarity on our story and then I'll go build that. And so we did. Again, I was very fortunate to have a CEO that trusted me with waiting a little longer. And part of what we did during that time when I said, okay, I think we understand after we had our first few dozen customers and early product market fit, I thought I understood in broad terms what our value is and to which customers do we serve and so on and so on. So we hired a creative agency, and the first process we did with them that they facilitated was to build our brand personality. This was way before we talked about colors and images and tone of voice. Like, who are we? If we were a person, what would we be like? And it's a fascinating exercise that I highly recommend to any company to go through. And one of the kind of aha moments in the outputs of that exercise was we married 2 qualities that I've seen very few companies marry before. And I'll tell you what they are. So the first is, if you ask almost any startup what they want to be known for, they'll tell you some version of, we want to be an authority in our field. We want to be the thought leader, right? And that makes sense. And that was one of our qualities that we wanted to be known for as well. But here's where most companies get it wrong. Most companies confuse that authority with being very stuffy and stuck up and condescending, which translates into boring. Like, you know what I'm talking about? All these websites and content and ads where you see stock photos of people in business suits shaking hands in their boardrooms. And this is like a 5-person startup and they're looking like Bank of America, right? It's ridiculous. And all their content, they think that to sound authority, they have to sound like a Forrester or a Gartner or a big bank or something like that. But the result is they sound really boring and nobody wants to read that content. Nobody wants to follow that brand. We made a different decision. We decided we're going to be known as an authority and a thought leader, but we're also going to be this really unbuttoned, hair down, playful, helpful brand. And by marrying those 2 things together, that's when it started getting interesting, because that dictated what our visual brand will look like. And now you understand where all the kind of playful images came from. To those who remember, when we launched our first visual brand in 2018, for the first 3 years, I didn't have a single stock photo on my website. It was all commissioned photography of these actors and actresses and dogs. That's where Bruno the dog, our mascot, was born. We had this playful makeup sales team that we shot in all these different poses and used them for 3 years as the exclusive photography on our website, which already gave us a very fresh, different look. And that also dictated the tone of voice that we used in the Gong Labs content and in our social media and in our conference talks. Everything was a little more relaxed than companies trying to come and kind of spread their gospel in a very, condescending tone. That was never us. We were always inserting jokes and talking about lighter topics. You might remember one year we published a study showing that salespeople who swear on their sales calls have higher win rates. Now, that's something that was very on brand for Gong. Like, who would go even study that? We put a lot of work into that. And we found that it happens. We found why it happens. And people are still talking about that study many, many years later. And that's the type of coherence that you get when you know who you are. And then everything that you build around that is derived from that personality, which in our case was trust and authority, and at the same time, approachability and playfulness.
That's awesome. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about your book, Courageous Marketing. I love the title. Curious to understand. Yeah, I'm curious to understand what the inspiration was, and also as a follow-up to that, I know we talked a little bit about psychological safety, so I think you touched on this a bit, but curious to understand, like, what does courageous marketing look like to you, day to day at a company like Gong or any other company that's doing B2B marketing?
Yeah, so I'll unpack that. There's 2 things there. Maybe I'll talk first about what it is, and then why now and why the book. So, to me, courageous marketing is all about having a strong unique, differentiated point of view that you use for everything you create, whether it's your brand's identity, your content marketing, your event experiences, your ads, your category creation, your team building, all of these things. How do I take a stand that is clear and unapologetic? And I go with that as far as I'm comfortable. That is what I call courageous marketing. And when I broke down the book about how my team did this in every area, you see the choices that we made in event experiences that are pretty different from what other companies are doing. You see the choices that we made with our content marketing and the choices we made with our category creation and our out-of-home campaigns and brand building. From going to Super Bowl to going to Times Square, we did these things when we were much younger than most companies who do these campaigns, and we found ways of hacking our way into places where companies our size didn't really belong. So that is what I mean by courageous marketing. I think if you do that consistently, it's both efficient and effective. It's efficient because you're getting a lot more bang for your buck compared to the budget that you actually have. And it's very effective because it gets a lot more people to know about you and trust you and want to do business with you, whether as customers or partners or employees. So that is, in a nutshell, my approach to courageous marketing. The kind of tagline on the back of the book is take the boring out of B2B marketing. And that's really the result of what it does. By being courageous, which again is the opposite of best practices. Remember, they're boring practices in reality. By using courageous marketing, you can achieve all these results. And to the second question on why now and what made me write the book. So it's really when I transitioned from my role as CMO to my current role as chief evangelist. For the first time, I broke free from the 12 Zoom call a day schedule. And I had a little bit more time to gather my thoughts and interview all the people that worked on my team and other CMOs that I admired, because I wanted to exchange notes with them and see what worked for them and make sure that things that worked for Gong were not just a fluke, but actually other CMOs said, oh yeah, I did this at Salesforce or I did this at Oracle and it worked really, really well. So you're onto something true here. So I thought that this would be the best way of inspiring as many marketers as I can and just getting these lessons into as many hands as I can. And so I was delighted when, after 18 months of work, 5 months ago, I was able to publish Courageous Marketing, became an instant bestseller in like a dozen categories, which was very, very exciting, and continues to sell really well. It's out there for those who want it in an audiobook and hardcover and paperback and digital if you can't wait to read it today.
Very solid book pitch there too. Very crisp. I just picked it up. I look forward to listening to it. And I love that it's so informed by things that you've authentically played out in your career and the way you've operated with your teams. Whether it's from your own experience at Gong or from the outside world, can you share a story or campaign that to you really embodies courageous marketing, and one that like really took guts and there wasn't certainty around it, but in the end it really paid off?
Sure, happy to. There's quite a few examples I can think of. I think a fun one, a lot of times in these interviews I talk about the Super Bowl commercial, but I think I've talked about it so much at this point that you can find those stories easily on other podcasts. But one that I'm proud of was around Dreamforce of 2019, the last one before COVID shut it down. We were looking for a way to make a big splash and a presence at Dreamforce in San Francisco. Anyone who's ever looked at the sponsor perspective for that event knows that like the tiniest booth just behind the bathroom is like $150K, which is a ton of money. And the bigger booth where you might actually get some attention because of the size and location, those are well into the seven figures. So the companies who take the big booth, they're spending $2-3 million on that booth. None of this was in my budget. And I knew there's got to be a way of getting attention without spending that kind of money. So we ended up doing a few things. I think the top three were these. Number one, I found a company who could wrap Uber cars for me. So I had them wrap 20 Uber cars with my branding. It said, goodbye opinions, hello reality, revenue intelligence by Gong. And the evil scheme was that I could pay the Uber drivers extra commission for picking up and dropping off people only around Moscone Center. So that was their financial incentive to swarm around Moscone Center all day, especially in the morning and afternoon hours when people were coming to the show and leaving the show. It seemed like there was a whole fleet of these cars all day around Moscone Center, and people started posting this on social media and asking me, like, we're the official transportation partner of Dreamforce because they just got on this Gong cab, and what's going on with that? So that was a big splash of visibility that cost me a tiny fraction of what the smallest booth at Dreamforce would have cost me. The second thing we did, we knew that some people are going to be using the city's underground Muni system. So I found the nearest station that was available. That was the Montgomery station in San Francisco. And we did a complete station takeover with our branding on the floor and the columns and the screens and every static billboard I could find there. And again, all this, it looked great. It cost a tiny fraction of what a booth at the show would have cost me. And thousands of people who moved through that station every day on their way to the show and back saw all this Gong branding around them. Now, other companies that were doing this were companies at the scale of Zoom and, of course, Salesforce themselves. So when you see Gong at that level of using those kind of mediums to get to the audience, what does that do to your perception of the company? You figure, oh, these guys are as big as Salesforce or Zoom, or getting close to that, right? Because they're doing all this huge advertisement that you typically associate with larger brands. So I call that approach punching above your weight, which is finding these mediums, hacking your way to look like a much larger advertiser, and then amplifying that on your company's social media and using your employees, mobilizing them, amplify the message further. So those were the two main things that we did kind of in media. And then the third one was just partnering and creating our own side events at Salesforce, at Dreamforce, which many companies, of course, do. And then they struggle to get foot traffic, because if you're doing just another happy hour, you might not fill the room because there are dozens of them every day, as everyone who comes to the show knows. But we found some creative hacks, like buying out a Michelin star restaurant in San Francisco. We do this year over year, and we do a very high profile executive event, and we can fill it easily every year because executives coming to Dreamforce after a long day at the show, they would love a nice relaxing dinner in a 2 or 3 star Michelin restaurant. And then we get a captive audience for those 3 hours where we can talk shop and feed them and wine and dine them. And again, we're getting the benefits that we wanted without having to have real presence at the show. So those are just some of the stories and ideas that stem from thinking a bit differently. Rather than buying the same booth that thousands of other companies are buying, what can we do differently to stand out and get even more value, and all this on a budget?
Yeah, those are awesome examples. I think too, when you go to a conference, it's like something in your subconscious tells you don't even look at the booths, and so that makes it even harder for people that are all following the best practices to actually stand out. I'm curious, you touched on, earlier, needing to not fully own the brand as the marketing team or as the marketing lead, but needing to have the CEO kind of as your ride or die, or sit in co-pilot with you on brand ownership. You talked a little bit about really needing to have a clear POV as a very foundational thing to developing some courage and being able to act on it. Is there something else that maybe in addition to those two things, it's really the starting point for CMOs that want to bring more courage into their work?
I'm going to get really tactical for a minute and say that, if you're interviewing for a new role, the interview should be bidirectional. So it's not just the CEO interviewing you, whether you'd be a good fit for them, but you interviewing the CEO to understand what she thinks great marketing looks like, what great experiences she had with other marketers, and understanding that that's something you're passionate and capable of providing. Because if your CEO is excited about all these kind of lame marketing attempts that you would consider best and boring practices, maybe this is not the right place for you. You need to vet what level of risk they're willing to take, how much they're going to let you go out on a limb, and all these things can predict your happiness and future success in the job. So I know I've not always done that due diligence earlier in my career, and I know many marketers are just happy to get a job in this market that they kind of skip doing part of that. But it's a really, really important predictor of what it's going to be like working for this company. And once you get a chance to speak with the CEO about this, next I would want to speak with the sales leader, because sales leader, I would argue, are the most important partner of marketing in any revenue organization and company. And if your sales leader doesn't believe in the power of marketing and doesn't believe in partnering with marketing, there's no way you're really going to succeed in the job. If sales and marketing are operating as silos, you're just never going to win at that company. So you need to make sure that you have a partner in crime leading the sales team who wants to partner with you, who believes in the power of marketing to build pipeline and build brand and create warm leads for their sales team to work on. Then you have a starting point that you can actually work on. So I think those are all the maybe quote unquote bland or boring prerequisites, but without them, like, you can come with all the courage and passion that you want, but you might not be able to succeed if the CEO and the sales leaders aren't looking to partner with you that way.
That's great.
So you've built high performing teams that blend creativity and, you mentioned earlier, a lot of autonomy, while still getting great guidance and ultimately having accountability to results. Whether it's inspired by your own, track record or observing other folks in action, what do you think great marketing leadership looks like in this moment?
Marketing leadership, like any leadership, should inspire. So you've got to bring the energy and the optimism, because if you don't bring it, like, it's just going to die out very quickly on your team. And I can say honestly, there were moments that I didn't always find that energy and optimism to bring, and my team immediately noticed, and it immediately changed their state of mind and their passion and their hard work. It's tough, but you have to bring it, and it's probably most important when things are not really going well, and when there's challenges, and maybe there's budget cuts or business is not as well as it could be going. Because it's easy to be happy and inspiring when everything is sunshine and rainbows. It's much harder to bring that passion and motivation when things are slower. But that would be the first thing. And just like in parenting, I think modeling the behaviors that you expect from your team is the best way to go about it. So if you're taking risks and doing crazy stuff and coming with interesting ideas, that's going to inspire your team to do more of that. If all you come up with are the most boring standard practices, like, who's going to inspire your team to do that? And then, of course, it also matters how you respond to their ideas. Do you discourage them? Because if you discourage crazy ideas by saying, like, that's a stupid idea, or that would never work, or we don't have budget for that, you do that 2 or 3 times, and guess what? The team is not going to come up with any more of those ideas, because you've signaled that you don't appreciate or encourage them. But if instead you say, oh, I love that crazy idea, and my team knows, like, if they come and start a conversation by saying, Udi, I have a crazy idea, I will drop whatever I'm doing because I'm excited to hear the crazy idea. And we'll either find a way of trying it out, or maybe tweaking it, or maybe putting a pin in it for next quarter. But I will never knock down a crazy idea. There really are no stupid ideas in my book, only a way of maybe trying to understand. So how do you think that's going to help business? And how could we pull that off? And why do you think this is going to work? So it's all about that. I think if you do that consistently, which is hard to fake, right? You have to have true conviction that this is the way to move forward, and this is the way to get the best out of your team. But if you do that, and you're there as a resource and as the biggest cheerleader for your team, I think that's how you build a courageous team.
No, that's great. Speaking of inspiration, I know we're almost at time here, but it seems like everyone's talking about how hard it is right now to succeed, to get momentum, keep momentum. You touched on earlier that it's a difficult job market. Lots of people are being told we got to figure out ways to do more with less. It's just, there's not a ton of optimism in certain corners of B2B marketing, we'll just say. But what's something that's currently right now giving you a lot of optimism about the future of B2B marketing?
I think AI is taking marketing by a storm, just like most professions. And I'm inspired by marketers and also technologists who are finding ways of harnessing the power of AI to do things that AI does best and take away drudgery and manual labor from marketing without trying to replace marketing where the human intelligence is still very much needed. So we're still seeing it's a mixed bag out there, right? And we're seeing this really crappy AI generated content. If like me, you're on LinkedIn, I'm now seeing AI bots comment on AI created posts, which makes me wonder, like, why do we still need LinkedIn? The bots are talking to the bots. Like maybe we don't need to be there anymore. I'm hoping that cleans up and subsides. I don't dream of it going away, but hopefully there'll be less of that as people realize that they're actually harming their own brands. Like I'm sure these are well-intentioned folks that someone talked them into, oh, I know you're busy. Let's automate all your LinkedIn stuff. And because you need to be commenting on 10 posts a day to increase your profile and you don't have time for that, let's let the AI bot do that for you and you'll get all the benefits without all the work. And that's a terrible idea. That's a terrible idea because those comments are so bad. They're not adding anything to your professional profile. They're probably detracting from it, and you're being counterproductive. And also, like we talked earlier about Kyle Lacey's approach to let's use AI to generate what it thinks are creative ideas and then take them off the table to make room for really creative ideas that are not yet the state of the art. That's how I'm seeing the best marketers balance human and artificial intelligence. And I hope we continue to get better at discerning what we should be using AI to do, take away some grunt work. AI is great at resizing that ad for 24 different channels. You don't need 2 graphic designers to work on it for a week anymore. AI can do that like a click of a button, but it's not going to come up with your smart, unique point of view of how you're seeing the future of the industry and how you're going to lead the company through that. You still need the human intelligence to do that. Use AI to make sure your capitalization is right if that's important to you, and to reformat that content for different mediums. But that's what I'm excited about right now.
That's awesome. Udi, this has been great having you on. For people that want to learn more about you, where's the best place for them to find you online and learn more about your book?
LinkedIn is where I live these days. So I've completely maxed out my contacts, but everyone can follow me. So feel free to follow me on LinkedIn, and please don't take it personally if I don't accept a connection request. I'm out of available contacts on LinkedIn. And my book, Courageous Marketing, is available everywhere books are sold. So go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you get your book, get Courageous Marketing. And if you do, write a review and let me know what you think of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Udi.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks.